Hi, I'm Donna McClurkin. I am here hosting in place of Denise Keel. Denise normally hosts these Fridays for Future event, but she's off today. And I also like to acknowledge Tim Tesser for co-hosting and for being for recording this session today. Appreciate that very much. So normally what we do at this time is welcome everyone, and I'd like to, before we start on welcoming our guest today, a plug for the November 12th session coming up, which is our next Fridays for Future. The City of Kalamazoo will give us an update on their sustainability plans. We will also have Kate Miller here from 350.org talking about their no idle policy. And also we will have an update on the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition's own action campaign. So we're looking forward to that as well. Just a reminder that we are soliciting blog submissions, and also would love to have anyone who is an individual or representing an organization to do a Fridays for Future presentation. And if I can get my act together here, I'm going to go ahead and put links in the chat box for blog submissions. And bear with me here. And Fridays for Future, in case you want to copy those links. Oh, you know what? Before we start, are there any announcements? I'd like to leave space for that as well. Anybody have any announcements of events coming up or anything else you'd like to share? Tim?
There's an extremely critical event coming up beginning on October 31st, which is the UN Council of Parties meeting number 26 in Glasgow, Scotland. The world is way behind where it needs to be in addressing the climate crisis and making commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I hope everyone will be aware of that and hoping that this meeting leads to great success. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Other announcements?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Max Offerman, and this is my first time actually joining one of the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition meetings. But I'm a recent graduate from Michigan State. I got my degree in environmental studies, and I've been thinking about trying to start sort of these climate cafes, if you guys might be familiar, but I won't take up too much of your time, but I was just wondering if there was someone that would be good for me to follow up with, perhaps like after the meeting.
Max, welcome. Thanks for putting that out there. I would love to connect with you afterward. We'll stay on, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Other announcements? I'd like to welcome Rebecca from the Climate Mobilization. And we were chatting just before the start of this as we were getting ready today. And I told Rebecca that I was curious about when I first started making contact with her and first learned about the Climate Mobilization. And it turns out that was in the summer of 2019, even before the Climate Crisis Coalition was formed. So just on a personal note, I have been, my own involvement in the climate work has been greatly informed by the Climate Mobilization on several fronts. One is this book called Facing the Climate Emergency, How to Transform Yourself with Climate Truth, which was authored by Margaret Klein Solomon, who's a psychologist. And when I first encountered an early version of the book before it was published, some excerpts from it, it really helped me in so many ways process my own, thoughts and feelings about what I was learning about climate change, and very, very influential, and very much appreciated that. And I have other reasons for following the Climate Mobilization, but they've informed my thinking in a lot of different ways. Perhaps today that will, you'll experience some of that as well. So I'm very excited to welcome Rebecca Harris. Rebecca is the organizing director of the Climate Mobilization. And we've talked on and off over the last several months about when would be a good time for her to talk with us. And today ended up being a great day. And so, and this feels like the right time for her to share her organizing work and what the Climate Mobilization is doing. Rebecca first got involved in organizing for justice at age 15. She now leads the TCM's organizing efforts. And most recently, she worked as development and communications manager at the Latino Union of Chicago, an immigrants and workers' rights organization. And she's also a 2017 graduate of a social justice communications training program called the Reframe Mentorship. So I had to look that up, and lots of interesting stuff there. So we want this to be interactive. Rebecca does have a presentation, but we want it to be interactive. Please do put any questions that you have in the chat, and there'll be a Q&A at the end as well too. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna, for that kind introduction. I am really grateful to have the opportunity to share this space and have a conversation with you all today around your work, some of the challenges coming up in your work, the resources that you can access to support your climate organizing work, as well as the resources that Climate Mobilization Network specifically can offer, which will be a focus of the presentation today. So today we'll do a brief check-in and welcome activity. After that, I will share just a little bit of background about climate mobilization. I'll give an overview of the climate emergency approach to organizing that our work is grounded in. Then I'll move into sharing some of the climate policy resources that we have available for climate groups and climate organizers. I'll share some of the organizing resources we have available to support local climate groups' efforts to build coalitions, involve new members, and hold effective advocacy and organizing campaigns. At the end of the presentation, to wrap up, I will share links to all of the different take-home tools that I'm sharing as part of today's conversation. And then we are going to move into a Q&A. So to start us off, I'd invite everyone here to check in the chat box. And as an introduction, share your name, the pronouns that you use, which might be she, her, he, him, they, them, or another pronoun. My pronouns are she, her. And after you introduce yourself in the chat, I'd like everyone to share in the chat box, what is the biggest challenge in climate organizing that you or your local climate group is facing? So welcome Max, welcome Chad, glad you could join us today. Welcome Marianne, welcome Tim and Terry. And once you've had a moment to think this through, you can go ahead and share in the chat box, what is the biggest challenge that you or your local climate group is facing? We'll take a couple minutes to think through this together and give everyone here time to respond. Okay, recruitment is a challenge. Thanks for sharing that, John. Democracy is messy and slow. Thanks for sharing that, Marianne. It's a great point. Getting people to understand the seriousness of the crisis, providing leadership across boundaries and bringing people together. Apathy. Thank you so much for everything that folks have shared so far. And thank you, Terry, for highlighting some of the economic and racial impacts of the system that we live under in this country, and the way that it also feeds into the climate crisis. Constituencies with a lot of competing priorities, transitioning people from understanding to action. So I am really grateful for all of the different challenges that folks in this room have identified. And I am here to say that you are not alone. As you may know, hundreds or even thousands of climate organizers in communities across the US and even around the world are dealing with these same challenges. And what drives Climate Mobilization's work is an effort to support climate organizers in grappling with these challenges and strengthening your climate organizing work. My next question for you to respond to in the chat box is, what resources do you have available to help you respond to the challenge that you named? So if you could take a second and just reply in the chat box. If you can think of one resource or a couple resources that you can tap into, or ways you've tried to grapple with these challenges in the past. Donna, I love that answer, each other. The people that we work with and organize with, our friends, our families, our community, can be some of the best resources that we have to advance our work to end the climate crisis. Friends who are eager to take action, organizations can be a great resource as well. The coalition, knowledge from schooling, outreach through social media. Great. So we'll come back to this theme of challenges and resources throughout the presentation. It is really great to see that so many folks in this room are tapping into each other, tapping into organizations and online resources as well to advance your climate organizing work. And I hope that the resources that I'm about to share can add on an additional layer of support to some of the challenges that folks here are grappling with. So to start, I'll share a little bit about climate mobilization. We are building power for a national transformation that rapidly restores a safe climate and creates a just and democratic society. We work in collaboration with local groups that are working to end greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030. Our work has been grounded in organizing to pass and implement climate emergency declarations, but we now work with any local climate group that wants to end greenhouse gas emissions at emergency speed. And some of the resources we offer include policy tools. We offer reflection, exchange, and networking opportunities where organizers can gather and bounce ideas off of each other. We offer community organizing training so organizers can systematically learn how to grow a membership base, how to build coalitions, and how to put pressure on elected officials to take action, particularly at the local, county, and state level. We also offer one-on-one peer coaching, which provides a space to connect with another organizer and have a space for reflection and growth and examination of the climate organizing work that you're doing, as well as a sounding board for additional climate organizing strategies that you or your group might be looking to try out. Climate Mobilization's work is grounded in the climate emergency approach to organizing. This is a specific type of campaign where, as many of you may have participated in as well, local climate groups pressure city councils or county boards to pass a climate emergency declaration and also to pass follow-up policies. At least 166 climate emergency declarations have now been passed in 24 states, covering 13% of the US population. And of those, 31 communities have committed to reaching zero emissions by the year 2030. Some examples of the leadership shown by organizers and communities around the US include Ann Arbor, Michigan, whereas many of you may already be familiar with. The community committed to zero emissions carbon neutrality by the year 2030 and developed a $1 billion climate action plan, which remains one of the most significant commitments to climate action by any community in the US. In Portland, Oregon, the city passed a climate emergency declaration. And then again, thanks to the work to pressure the city being done by local organizers, the city implemented the first ever anti-displacement action plan that includes climate impacts on housing to allow residents to stay in the city. The city adopted a community-led approach to adopting and evaluating climate policies, and has committed to phasing out fossil fuels while engaging with labor unions and communities impacted by the fossil fuel industry. In Berkeley, California, after the city adopted a climate emergency declaration, the city went on to launch a regional coalition effort to get neighboring municipalities to also work to end greenhouse gas emissions. The city adopted new building codes that phased out new natural gas hookups. And ultimately, 40 communities across California adopted similar restrictions and likely contributed to Governor Newsom's ban on gas-powered vehicles by the year 2035. And I want to be clear that all of these victories are due to the hard work of people just like all of you in this room. And these victories show exactly why the work that we're doing on a daily basis to push our local governments to take action is so important. Building on this work and building on what Climate Mobilization has learned from communities around the US, we recently released a new policy guide that is one of the take-home tools that I'm going to share with all of you today. This policy guide shares strategies that cities and counties can use to reach zero emissions by the year 2030. It shares dozens of policy and program examples across six major policy categories, and it provides a grab bag of policies that organizers can choose from. It also has a guide to getting started and some of the conversations that you might want to have with groups in your community to choose a policy campaign focus for each category. And I'll share a link at the end of today's conversation that you can use to download the policy toolkit. I'll just briefly give an overview of some of the types of policies that our guide includes. The first major policy category that our work covers is committing to zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030 at the local level. Policies in this category can include climate emergency declarations, which we have a template for in the toolkit if anyone is looking for, but also climate action plans that aim for a goal of zero emissions by 2030. Climate and environmental impact tests that mandate that new policies and projects be advancing a goal of zero emissions. As well as obviously allocating additional staff and additional planning resources towards the goal of zero emissions by 2030. The second policy bucket that we include is deepening democracy and justice through democratic planning and democratic allocation of resources. And this can mean hosting community assemblies where residents get to decide what climate policies are. This can mean ensuring a preferential hiring or creating a union hiring requirement for government contracts for publicly funded projects. It can also mean setting aside a specific percentage of public investment in climate projects for frontline communities that have been shut out from investment in the past. Our next policy bucket, Create, Invest, Divest, speaks to creating sources of climate funding, investing in human needs, and also divesting in harmful budget categories like prisons and policing. So as climate organizers, we can do this by finding common cause with organizers who are working to prioritize human needs in our local, town, city, and county budgets. We can also push local governments to develop a participatory budgeting process where residents determine directly how funds are spent. And moving to new revenue sources, communities can issue municipal bonds for climate projects, can expand taxes to raise revenue for climate programs, and can also look at specific financial tools like fossil fuel risk bonds. The next policy bucket that our guide covers is 100% renewable democratic energy. And this is about creating 100% clean renewable energy through community choice aggregation programs and or through locally controlled public power utilities so that our energy generation is owned publicly and is passing those savings along to consumers rather than to private industry. Phasing out fossil fuels and other high emission sources is another key area that our policy guide covers. So we offer tools and example policies around phasing out fossil fuel extraction and infrastructure. So for instance, shutting down drilling sites, preventing pipeline construction, and phasing out refineries and other fossil fuel infrastructure. Electrifying transportation, advancing electric vehicles, electric bikes, expanding public transportation and human-powered transportation infrastructure. And then also phasing out the use and sale of fossil fuels and fossil fuel-powered appliances in buildings. So phasing out natural gas hookups is an example of that, but also ultimately ending the use and sale of gas stoves, furnaces, other gas appliances. And ultimately, even in some communities, phasing out the sale of gasoline. And our sixth policy bucket, drawing down carbon from the atmosphere, is about changing how city and county lands are used so that they are drawing down as much carbon as possible, and also changing overall land use policy to promote land being used in a way that sequesters as much carbon as it possibly can. So I've given you a whirlwind tour of some of the policies that our policy guide covers. If any of these are of interest to you, I'll be sharing a link to download our organizer toolkit and policy guide at the end of today's call. And for anyone who may really want to dive much, much deeper into the policy side of things, there is a great report from the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance called "This Is Not a Drill: How Communities Are Using the Climate Emergency to Make Big New Moves to Decarbonize Locally." And I will send along a link to access this report. So I'm going to shift gears and switch to talking a little bit about some of the organizing resources that we have available at Climate Mobilization. And I think some of the resources that we have speak to some of the challenges that folks raised earlier, whether around apathy, outreach, membership, sort of the nuts and bolts of running an organization that engages people and engages constructively with the democratic process that we have at the local government level. Before we dive in though to talking about those resources, I want to invite us to think about our own journey as organizers, our own journey as change makers. And to share your response to these questions in the chat box. So first, think about when you first began working to create change. Who were the people who showed you the way? Who were the people who first helped you understand how you could take action? And I know that for myself, I'll share a little bit while folks, write their response in the chat box. I first got involved when I was in 10th grade during the run-up to the Iraq War. And I had a neighbor who was a peace activist who took me under her wing, who was driving me around to meetings, who was helping me understand what was even happening in the organizing meetings I was going to, who really just showed me a lot, both in the specific skills she was relaying to me, and also in her way of being and her way of interacting and just modeling how she lived her life and the priority she placed on taking action for peace and for justice. And I'm seeing some responses in the chat box. The AME Church, great. Bill McKibben, Howard Zinn. Michigan State University had a student Sierra Club. I found out about Line 5, joined the club, and began my journey. Environmental groups, Citizens Climate Lobby. My grandmother, who taught me organic gardening, composting, and how to use resources. And I'm hearing someone say also, they were on their own mostly. A group of activists in Ann Arbor who just created an organization and showed up with pressure and ideas. Great. So these are really great answers, right? For many of us, our journey as change makers began through our personal relationships. And that is great. Just like what Donna said in the beginning of the presentation, some of the best resources that we can access for how to do this work come from each other and come from our relationships. But I know from my personal experience that at the same time, I've gotten a lot of support from the people I know, but there's also been times that I have felt at a loss for resources. There have been times that I have felt like I was having to reinvent the wheel. And there's been times that I didn't have all the resources around me that I needed. And I think we can see from the responses that a lot of our journey maybe has been happenstance. We lucked out that someone took us under their wing. We lucked out that we found the right organization and that we were able to connect with the resources that we needed to move along our journey as change makers. At Climate Mobilization, we believe that community organizing gives us a proven set of strategies and tools that we can use to make change. And we are dedicated to helping organizers who are working on climate change access these resources. Climate community organizing shows us how we can connect with other people, how we can build each other up as leaders, how we can use our collective power, how we can get cities to take stronger climate action. And I could add more, how we can welcome new members, how we can build coalitions, how we can run successful campaigns. And you can access training and resources on these topics and more in a couple of different ways. One is through the organizer toolkit, which comes together with the policy guide, and I'll share a link to download it at the end of our conversation. You can also access resources through Climate Mobilization Network, which is going to be the focus of the next couple minutes of what I share. Climate Mobilization Network is a network we convene that connects local organizations so that we can collaborate, learn from each other's work, and take action as a unified movement. And the main emphasis of Climate Mobilization Network is on peer-to-peer sharing and reflection, so that as organizers and change makers, we can take time and set aside the space to think about our work and think about how to make it more effective, and also learn from others about approaches that we can try. The network is a community of local groups that are working towards zero emissions by the year 2030. It's a place where groups share their work, where we offer as Climate Mobilization trainings, webinars, and reflection activities through quarterly meetings. And it's currently home to 32 member groups. And we are proud to call in Michigan, Grand Rapids Climate Action, as well as Michigan United, members of the network. If you are part of a group that's interested in joining Climate Mobilization Network, you can access quarterly calls with other climate groups across the US, trainings, webinars. You can access the one-on-one campaign coaching from a peer organizer that I mentioned earlier. We also have an online Slack where group members can connect between calls, and network members get to give input on planning future programming for the network. The network has a set of shared values that guide our work together, and we ask organizations that are considering joining the network to look these over and evaluate if your group feels aligned with these values. We also have a set of community agreements that cover our work together in network spaces. If you are interested in potentially joining the network, which I should be clear is a network of organizations. So this is if you're interested in bringing this network information back to your group. Your next step would be to fill out an interest form that I'll share a link to in a second. Then you would have a meeting with Maria, our network organizer. And after that, we just ask you to confirm if your group's aligned with the network mission, values, community agreements, and can commit to sending at least one person to at least half the network calls, which is a total of 2 calls a year. So the network, like I mentioned, has quarterly meetings 4 times a year, 90 minutes long, and we ask member groups to make a commitment of joining at least half of those calls. So with that, I have reached the end of my presentation, and I'm going to recap some of these take-home tools that we have for you before we move into the Q&A. If you, and I'm going to put these links in the chat box, if you would like to learn more about Climate Mobilization Network, the link here is bit.ly/join-network2021, and that's the network information form. If you would like to download the organizer toolkit and policy guide, there's a form you can fill out online that gives you access to both. And that's at https:/bit.ly/2030toolkit. And after today's call, I'll also send along a link to a webinar that covers the entire Climate Mobilization 2030 policy platform in much more depth for those who are interested in hearing every single policy explained and spelled out. It's another resource that we have available. All right, so with that, let's move into our Q&A. Who has questions that you'd like to share? You can put your question in the chat box, or you can also raise a hand. Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just struck as I read through the comments in the chat, which I know you couldn't call all of them out. There's so many, but I was struck by the wide variety of influences that people have had. Everything from, very well-known authors and environmental writers and all the way to, people in my church or faith-based written materials that are sourced from, well, faith-based, as I said, and I'm just struck by the wide variety of ways in which people have found themselves to this movement.
Yeah, great point, Donna. Tom, looks like you have a question or comment.
I do. You mentioned I guess it was a manual called "This Is Not a Drill," and I wonder if that's available on your website or in your materials.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we linked to it on our website actually, but I will send a list of links with the take-home tools to Donna so that they can be forwarded perhaps to everyone who registered. Donna, is that possible? Okay, I see that. I see a nod that will be, and I'll make sure to send that. I'm writing myself a note right now. Great question. Is it fair to characterize your policy approach as progressive, and how desirable and realistic, however desirable these goals might be, how realistic are they in an environment where 48% of voters voted for Trump? So yes, we do pursue progressive policy goals that bring together a focus on climate change with a focus on addressing racial and economic injustice. I think that there is a city level and town level question here about, for organizers in each local community to decide which of the grab bag policy items are the best fit for their community. There's a question also about, what is going to be exciting to people in each community? What aligns with the approaches that organizations in your community are taking currently? So I think I would suggest that anyone who's looking at the policy guide really think about not just what your climate group is doing, but what other organizations in your community are doing. Look for alignments, build relationships across climate organizations and organizations working on other issues, and explore together with other organizations what you want your community to look like going forward and what campaigns you might want to pursue together. And I think that gets at this question of realistic as well. I think that a lot of climate mobilization's policies generally push the bounds of what was once considered realistic. And we've seen that by doing that, we can create wins that push the envelope and make previously unrealistic policies within the realm of possibility going forward. And the way that organizers do that, right, is by building power, by bringing together as many organizations and individuals as possible to create a common agenda. And even in a community where 48% of people voted for Trump, if enough of the remaining 52% of people are mobilized and organized and taking action, if perhaps even some Trump voters might find an economic benefit or something appealing in those policies as well, there is the opportunity to win significant change and significant concessions around climate. I see Cynthia and Alan have a question.
Thank you for your wonderful work that you're doing and for offering to connect with us. I think it's really terrific and will be helpful to build that connection. I have a couple of thoughts. One is I noticed your work is really focused on local towns and cities and so forth, which seems like a great place to focus and to get traction and to add some addition, as they add up, they make a huge impact. I really appreciate that. I noticed you're not really focusing at state level, or like right now we've got this national thing happening where, the Biden plan is being basically undermined. and so forth, which does seem like something we want to respond to somehow in our local area. And even I wonder about this group thinking about that. But the real thing I want to ask you about is public schools and public and private schools. And I was struck by your comment about being in 10th grade and getting mobilized. And I wonder if you have done any work or if you have suggestions for groups that want to collaborate with teachers and schools, and how that might be further explored.
Yeah, great question. So Climate Mobilization Network includes a mixture of youth-led and adult-led climate organizations. And as we've seen, many youth-led climate groups are at the forefront of the climate movement and are boldly leading us forward with incredibly ambitious demands. I think the first question for an organizer wanting to collaborate with young folks is, where are young people already organizing in your community? What issues are they already working on? Is there a club at school, or perhaps another organization outside of school where young people are organizing, or communities even where young people are gathering online around specific issues? So you can think about, finding out about from parents, from teachers, school connections, what clubs and activities already exist in your community, or if there's a Sunrise Climate Strike, Fridays for Future type of group in your community, looking for collaboration there. I think starting there, and I know if that does not already exist, you can also collaborate potentially with teachers and schools to explore the possibility of offering something like that for students who might be interested in joining. And for anyone looking to learn about an example of youth-led climate emergency campaigns, the Gen Cleo program run by Cleo Institute in Florida offers a great example. They have passed, I believe it's now 5 climate emergency declarations across the state of Florida, and are still pushing for follow-up policy actions. Mark, go ahead.
So before today, I was unaware of this network. We do have a Michigan climate network, and there are other groups that, so I'm trying to figure out, and I will certainly go to the website and read everything that's there and figure this out. You are a network of groups, not of individuals. And so the model is that each group that decided to join would have a representative or 2 or 3 who would take turns going to the meetings and bringing back the information. So I guess my question is rather ill-formulated. Could you give some examples for the group here of some of the groups that are already part of the network, and just give me a more concrete idea of what it is we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, one clarification: groups that are members of the network can bring as many members of the group as they want to a call. So you could bring all 10 of your group's members, for instance, to a network gathering, or you could just send 1 representative. In terms of network member groups, I believe I already mentioned Michigan United, as well as Grand Rapids Climate Coalition here in Michigan. Some other member groups include Acton Climate Coalition in Acton, Massachusetts, Bronx Climate Justice North, Western New York Youth Climate Council, the Charleston, South Carolina Climate Coalition, a climate emergency declaration campaign in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Cleo Institute in Florida, Confront the Climate Crisis, a youth-led statewide organization based in Indiana, working to pass climate emergency declarations around the state of Indiana. A number of Extinction Rebellion chapters are members of the network as well in Chicago, Richmond, San Francisco, St. Louis, an indivisible group in Gainesville that's working to advance these policies there. So without making you sit through the whole list of 32 groups, I hope that gives some idea. Yeah.
But it is mostly local or regional or perhaps statewide groups that are members of this network.
Yeah.
And not something like, do you have any relationships? I'm active in several different groups like CCL and like have been previously in 350 and so forth. But your network's relationships are mostly with more local groups than that.
Yeah, our niche as an organization is providing additional support to primarily volunteer-led, but some staffed as well, climate groups that are working at the local level that want additional peer sharing and resources and training, oftentimes beyond what the national organization that they're already part of provides. And I'll say a lot of networks pursue joint campaigns. Our main focus is not on policy campaigns together as a group. Our focus when we come together as a group is mostly on learning, exchange, and sharing. And I hope that makes sense and answers the question. Nikki.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned raising taxes to get money and different zoning ordinances. Michigan is very unusual in that a lot of the local governments can't do that. Like, you can't hear me, sorry. And a lot of the local governments can't do that, like townships. So we have township governments. So do any of your members talk about alternatives to those kind of problems and the sources?
Right. So, I mean, I think if there's not a way to create additional revenue, there's not a millage or a levy that you can try to put up for a vote by a governing body or by residents. Essentially, it would come down to looking at the existing budget and where you can reallocate those funds. It would also come down to possibly seeking support from outside sources, right? State funding, federal funding, even private funding. I think it's worth, I know you're the expert on your community. If that's a specific question you have that you want our policy staff to research more in terms of like, is there anything you can do funding wise? I would say just email me and we'd be happy to look into it and offer some quick suggestions. And I'll put my email address in the chat for anyone that wants to reach out to me with a specific question. Anyone else have questions? All right. One more thing I'll add in response to the question about relationships with national groups. We do also have a partnership with Elders Climate Action. We work with Elders Climate Action in collaboration in a structure where they also support some of their local chapters in carrying out climate emergency campaigns. And we're really thrilled and grateful that we have that relationship with them. We work to make all of our resources available to Elders Climate Action members and volunteers as well. So. Question, how do we get more of the 2,000 people of the KCCC email list to attend these meetings? There's a lot I could say about that. We ran a training on turnout and outreach recently for one of our network member groups. My sense is it can come down to the type of outreach that's being done. So email, text message, or phone call. And it can also come down to how personal that outreach is. So oftentimes we find at Climate Mobilization, it's more successful to do a sort of more in your face or more immediate type of communication. So moving up from an email to a text message, or moving from a text message to a phone call. And when we find that we're not getting enough people engaged, that's often a switch we'll make in our organizing. And also, if we're talking about who's sending those out, is the contact being made by someone that an organizer knows, or is it being made by someone that they don't know? And trying wherever possible to have someone who has a relationship, who's had past contact, do that outreach. But bottom line, there's no substitute for getting the phone numbers in addition to the emails. Tom, go ahead.
Hi, I don't want to be a wet blanket. What I want to know is 2030 seems like a really ambitious goal. What are some specific ways to do that, especially in a place like Michigan, where solar energy is going to take a lot of effort to get us up to speed? With November coming now, that we're not going to see the sun a lot. Things like that. What are the practical ways that you can encourage people to do this without them immediately saying, well, that's impossible. We can't do that. Right.
So in Michigan, it's my understanding the state needs to lift the cap on renewable energy. Is that, am I getting that right? I think you all know probably more about this than I do. So that's going to be a big part of it. I think, so I think with electricity, particularly, there's work that needs to be done at the state level. There's work that can be done to pressure utilities as well, right? So these can be campaigns focused on targeting the local government, but we can also pressure utility companies to change the options that they're offering, right? And we have power as consumers. We may have power over the contracting decisions that come up, review board decisions where state or local entities execute these franchise agreements, I believe they're called, where power utilities are made the official power supplier, or given those rights to operate. So I think we really have to look at where we can use our power, where we can be strategic, and who are the decision makers that have the power to change this. And then I think also knowing that we need massive investment. We need massive investment from local governments as well as state and national governments, and setting aside that money for climate programs, for potentially even local communities to create community solar or other local renewable electricity sources, is going to take time and energy, and it's going to take getting a lot of people and a lot of groups on our side. So I know that we are 3 minutes till the hour. I think I may have ran over, so I'll turn it back over to Donna.
Thank you, Rebecca, and to everyone for just really, really good questions and engagement. Appreciate it. Boy, there's a lot I could say, but we're out of time. Anybody want to end with some last minute thoughts? Any feedback? Anything Rebecca can take back with her? We're very grateful that you came and spoke with us today, Rebecca. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been so wonderful to be in dialogue with all of you, and I really appreciate every single question that everyone asked.
Yeah, I feel like this conversation could have gone on a little bit longer, but we are out of time. Rebecca, my notes, according to my notes, indicate that you have some links you're going to be sharing with us, and we will get those out to the folks that are the 2,000 folks that Tim mentioned that are on our email list, and also we'll figure out a way to get them disseminated possibly on Facebook and other places too. So thank you very much for that. I would just, on a personal note, kind of looping back to the way I began, I've learned a lot from this organization and the publications that they have, all of which are free, which is really, really a gift. One of them is leading the public into emergency mode, and a variety of other publications, which I believe are on the Climate Mobilization's website. So I would encourage you to check those out too. And again, the book, Facing the Climate Emergency, another plug for the book.